sessions. And so I'm in a conference next week in Portland and there are no active sessions. So I think it's a wonderful way to start off your day. And I hope you have a wonderful time with Dr. Oliver. Not only is she a tremendous human being, she's an incredibly talented surgeon, and we are so fortunate to have her here at ECU Health. I know Ellen and our whole group here have been very excited about this event and very honored to host it here at the ECU Health campus. And I wanted to tell you just a bit about our hospital system here. You are on the campus of the largest hospital in a 9-hospital system that serves 1.4 million people in the east part of the state, and it covers 29 counties. This summit is so very important to us because we've made many improvements to pedestrian and bicycle safety, but we have a lot more work to do here. At our trauma center last year, in just a single year, we admitted 51 bicycle related injuries, and 30% of those were pediatric. We admitted 98 pedestrian injuries, of which 13% of those were pediatric, all of them under the age of 12. This hospital is dedicated to enriching the lives of all that we serve, and a very important part of that is injury prevention and preventing people from landing in that hospital. I'm very, very proud to be the medical director of injury prevention here, and to work with outstanding people like Ellen and Sue Ann and Brianna and Denise. And this is an incredibly active group, and I could sit here and read 3 pages of their 30-day summary for last month. That's how active they are, 3 pages worth of work, but we'll highlight just a few things that are pertinent to this particular conference. Many of you got to participate in a walking tour yesterday, and you noticed the crosswalks that have been added to campus. When I moved here 9 years ago, those didn't exist, and we had safety concerns. The one on 5th Street, many of our medical students live in those apartments, and people that work at the hospital live in those apartments, and they're crossing 4 lanes of traffic. And you can imagine playing Frogger is not really what you're going to do when you're late for your shift or running a little behind. So that is the result of efforts with our award-winning Greenville Traffic Safety Task Force that's worked to lower our state rating for #1 in crashes to #8. And we're very, very proud of that. And that task force was awarded the Safe States Injury and Violence Prevention Achievement Award because of that work. During the months July, August, and September, over 1,500 bicycle helmets were distributed to children and families in Eastern North Carolina through partnerships with the North Carolina Department of Transportation, Safe Kids Worldwide, and Children's Miracle Network here in town. We also are very fortunate to participate in teen safe driving programs, and this particular grant cycle has focuses on Pitt County, Houston County, and Lenore County, and we've reached over 1,100 students and over 100 parents. And then later on today, I think many of you will get to participate in the ribbon cutting of our Hillcrest Park Traffic Safety Garden later this afternoon. This is a community that is alive and well and active. On any given Saturday, if you make your way to the Greenway, you will see groups of runners and cyclists and walkers and groups. We even have these angels here that are runners that participate in helping our children with special needs. You have a very exciting day ahead of you. I had the opportunity to speak with a couple folks at the table here, and I was telling Melody, I said, man, I feel like that's my life and my connection to this community. When I moved here 9 years ago, I never would have thought I'd still be here. You know, I interviewed on Greenville, South Carolina, Greenville, North Carolina, and I truly have fallen in love with this community, and it is our family. And we're very much a part of it. And so I'm thrilled that you're here to see what we have in Greenville. We were also talking a little bit about the pandemic, and that's when I started running again. And I identify with some of the topics later on about how important that Greenway is and how important it helped with the isolation of the pandemic to be back and running with friends. And And, you know, my best friends in town, they're 3 working moms and we run together. And our motto for that time, as we participated in the Black Beard Challenge, which is a 100-mile relay race from Corolla to Hatteras. It's a lot of fun, both in our life and in our learning, is you can do hard things. And so I was alive, but wasn't really living until I put activity back in my life, and it makes such a difference. So I am thrilled that you're here. I'm thrilled that you're committed to safety so that we can all continue to keep our activities going. And I look forward to the rest of your day.
One fun fact about Sweetwater.
Oh, one fun fact about Sweetwater. So we were also talking about this. This is hilarious because I have someone who knows where Saudi Daisy is, which is in my county. So Monroe County is where I grew up. Sweetwater is about a population of 3,000, or at least it was when I grew up there. And we were talking about kind of Monroe County's claim to fame is Ben's bacon or Ben's ham. So if you've ever eaten at a very fine restaurant, that is stored/smoked in a cinder block building in Monroe County. And then we're also known for the Lost Sea. So if you go driving through Tennessee on 75, you'll see signs for the Lost Sea, which is the largest underground lake, I'm told. I've never verified that fact. So that's that. But like Ellen said, you know, yes, medical director, all that stuff. Probably the hat I wear and am most proud of are my 2 kids, Hank and Harper. So I have a 7th grader and a 3rd grader, and then my husband Jeff, because they lived with me throughout my entire career. When he proposed to me before we graduated undergraduate, and so he's been through the entire medical process all across the country. So he gets an honorary degree, and certainly all the respect for patience and kindness with our life. But that's that. All right, have a great day.
How y'all doing? Good. We are so excited about today. I have to tell you, my hero is sitting over here. As I mentioned, asked me when we did the walk on it the other day. I am self-appointed president of the baby.
So as I was saying, my hero's here, and this is Melody Warren, who we get a chance to introduce today. And I now have another fan club member who is Stephen over here. So if anybody else wants to be a fan club, you will definitely want to join after this, because she is just so awesome. And you're going to be hearing about these 2 books that she's going to be sharing that she's written. And you can see this with Judy quite a bit. I had to show her how much I use this book in our local communities work with the AARP, but just awesome. And you're in for a real treat. So let's hear about Melody here. And I want to just share just a few things about her. But I am from a small town too. I just wanted to mention that. My godmother's from Saudi Daisy. So when I met Shannon, we started talking about good old Tennessee. But I'm originally from the Navajo Indian Reservation. So if you can just imagine how remote that is, we don't have sidewalks at all. We ride our horses to school, you know, things along that line. So when you get out of that environment and you come into an environment like this, and how Melody has put things so well in perspective, it's just families, communities, families. So let's talk about Melody for a second. As I mentioned, she's the author of those 2 fabulous books. This is Where You Belong, Finding Home Wherever You Are. And that's all about place and how you have attachment to place. And then, of course, she's got her great other sequel here, If You Could Live Anywhere. And that describes how location, and people choose where to live and how communities can attract and retain them. And she is really famous. She is in the New York Times. She is in Reader's Digest, Women's Day, housekeeping. I mean, she is getting the word out. And she lives in Blacksburg, Virginia, and she drove 5 hours to be here with us today. And she's got to drive back because this is talking about community and supporting her family. She's got a daughter who has her homecoming tonight. So, you know, priorities are priorities, right? So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to our dear friend Melody. Let's give her a round of applause.
We need it just simple.
I feel like after that introduction, you are bound to be disappointed. After you have been told, you're gonna join my fan club. And I am a celebrity. I really don't feel like a celebrity at all.
Just a book author who, what was on here?
I'm just a book author who wrote a couple books about loving where you live, and
That is what I wanted to talk about with you today. Can you guys hear me okay?
okay, awesome. So I feel like coming to a conference in North Carolina that is about biking and walking and telling you about Matt Tomasulo might be a little like going to a gathering of New York Yankees fans and being like, I'm gonna tell you about Derek Jeter. I know you probably don't know anything about him and he's awesome. But just in case there are people here who are not aware of Matt Tomasulo, let me tell you a little about him. So I met Matt Tomasulo when I was writing my first book. He was a guy who had moved to Raleigh and pretty much instantly did not like it. And part of the problem here was that he had moved from Copenhagen. Copenhagen was where he had done a study abroad. It was a place where everyone biked and everyone walked, and there were always people on the streets, and he loved that. He loved how vibrant and exciting it felt. And then he went to Raleigh, and no one biked, and no one walked, and there was no one on the street ever. He started getting curious about that, what was going on, and he began asking his neighbors, do you ever walk to the grocery store? And they would say, no, of course not. And he would say, why not? And they would say, it's too far. And he'd say, it's only a 6-minute walk, I timed it. And they would say, go away and don't come back. I'm done talking about this. It wasn't that it was impossible or illegal to walk in Raleigh, it just wasn't the culture. And Matt wanted to change that. But how do you change the culture of an entire city around biking and walking? So Matt was a student of urban planning, and he came up with this idea that he would make some wayfinding signs. He designed them himself, and they were like this. They were signs that pointed people toward interesting things around Raleigh and told people exactly how long it would take you to get there on foot. And there was a QR code that you could scan and it would pop up a map. And the idea was that maybe people would see these signs and maybe they would realize that walking in Raleigh wasn't that hard, that this was something that they could do. So Matt did not get permission to do this. Instead, he got a couple of friends and they dressed all in black like ninjas. And one night they went out and they just started like zip tying these signs to utility posts in downtown Raleigh. At one point, a cop actually approached them and asked if they had permission. And they were just like, this is totally legit. Look at these signs. Managed to convince this cop. And it was all okay. So Matt went home at the end of the night. And at that point, all he could do really was just wait to see what happened. And at first, it didn't seem like anything was happening, you know, like there wasn't a good way to measure whether people all of a sudden were walking. But soon it seemed like people started noticing the signs and they got a little local press attention. And then there was some national media coverage of the signs that Matt had made in Raleigh. And that made the city of Raleigh finally get wind of this thing that had happened. And so what did they do? They took the signs
Sit down. Sit in. Because that's what you do. You get permission, take the signs down. But at that point, there was a little momentum there. People were excited about these signs and what they signified in Raleigh. So a petition began to be circulated, and eventually the signs went back up, and they became so popular, such a beloved, interesting thing in Raleigh, that Matt actually kind of turned this into a little nonprofit. He started getting invitations from other neighborhoods in Raleigh and soon other communities outside of Raleigh to come make signs for them. And this became a website where you could go and you could make signs for your own community and illegally put them up wherever you wanted them to go. So I loved learning about Matt's story, and not only because he did this amazing thing, but because he was someone whose story seemed like mine. Because he started out not really liking the place where he lived. That was my situation. So Matt moved to Raleigh because of grad school. My family moved to Blacksburg, Virginia, because my husband got a job at Virginia Tech. We moved there in 2012 with our 2 daughters. And at the time we moved, I really thought Blacksburg was going to be the best place. But I kind of thought that about every place we ever moved. I was a firm believer in something called the geographic cure. And it's this idea that if you can just find the right place, the right city, that city is going to face you. It is going to heal you. You are going to be a better person in this city. And that was my idea about Blacksburg. I was moving to a smallish college town in the South, and I was going to be happier, and I was going to be healthier, and I was going to be a better friend and a better neighbor, and everything about my life was going to be better in this new town. And then we actually moved, and I realized that once again, I've been delirious about this process because that's not what happened. We were moving from Austin, Texas, so Blacksburg was a lot smaller, and it felt like a place where there just wasn't really anything to do. We didn't know anyone. Despite how small it was, I couldn't find my way around. It started raining a lot, and people said, "Oh yeah, we call it Bleaksburg. Didn't we tell you?" And I just thought, oh my gosh, we have made a terrible mistake. At that point, my family had moved a fair bit. This was our 5th state in about 12 years. And because we had been mobile for so long, my response to the situation was just to be like, listen, we gave it a good college try of about a month, and it didn't work out. So let's just cut our losses. And we're going to go on realtor.com and we're going to find a new town to move to. And that town will be the better town. That's going to be the town that fixes our life and makes everything better for us. But because we had just moved there, my husband had started a new job, my kids were in this new elementary school. For my older daughter, who was in 5th grade, it was her 3rd elementary school in 3 states. And I knew that there would be major future therapy bills if I didn't learn to just stay put and maybe be happy in the town. So not liking where I live does not make me unusual. At any given moment, about a third of Americans kind of feel the same way, that they wish they could move from their city. In fact, Richard Florida, the sociologist, says that there are 3 kinds of people based on our relationship with our place, and I have been all 3 of them. First are people who are mobile. Those are people who maybe in a season of their life where they're moving a lot, and they don't really feel committed to any particular community. Then are the people who feel stuck. That was me in those early days in Blacksburg. You don't really like where you live, but you also feel like you can't move because of, jobs or money or family. You just feel kind of trapped there. It's not a great feeling. But then there is this 3rd group, and those are people who are rooted. So they're people who, for whatever reason, they may have been in their town their whole life, or they may have only been there a few months, but they feel like they love it there. They feel happy there. They are glad to be there and they feel like they want to stay. So that is what I wanted for myself. And I knew that I wanted that in Blacksburg. And I began to ask myself this question: what makes people love where they live? Like seriously, what has to happen for people to transfer from mobile through stuff and on to rooted? So I have been a writer and a journalist my whole career, and I'm used to consulting experts about these kind of thorny questions. And so that is what I did. I went into the scientific literature and I started looking at what researchers have written about how people build relationships with their place. And that is where I came across a concept that ended up changing my life, and I think is really powerful for other people. It has the chance to change your life, or that of people you know. And it's this: place attachment. So place attachment is the term that scientists and sociologists and psychologists use to describe that feeling of being deeply rooted in a place. It is that feeling of being at home somewhere, that feeling of being part of a community, of having community pride. When I try to describe it, it's like, think of a time when you have like been away from your home and you're coming back to town and you just feel that sense of, I am home. And that is a little bit what place attachment feels like. It's really rooted in our emotions. And so that makes it a little hard to describe. It's something that we've all experienced, right? We know that feeling of being at home in a place. So despite how emotional place attachment can be, the research shows that it actually has some concrete, measurable benefits for people who experience it. So place attachment is great for well-being. That when you feel place attached, your well-being on all different measures tends to rise. You're just a little bit happier and a little bit healthier in most aspects of your life. People who are place attached have higher levels of social capital, those relationships that help us accomplish things. They have higher levels of self-esteem. Health improves. One study that I found done by the University of Michigan found that those people who trusted their neighbors, which is an element of place attachment, were far less likely to suffer a heart attack or a stroke. I even encountered a study of elderly Japanese women that found that those who liked where they lived and liked the people who lived around them lived on average about 6% longer than those who didn't. So what is going on here? I think it's that place attached people just behave a little differently. They do things a little differently. They act in ways that happen to be really good for them. They do things like volunteer, be more civically engaged, work with neighbors to solve problems. And they happen to behave in ways that are also really good for their community. So the Knight Foundation partnered with Gallup on a study called The Soul of the Community. And over the course of 3 years, they interviewed thousands and thousands of people in cities big and small, a couple dozen of them, in places like Charlotte and Miami, but also tiny towns like Milledgeville, Georgia. And they asked people how they liked where they lived. And then they asked people what made them feel that way, what made them like where they lived. And what came out of it was kind of surprising. They identified 3 qualities of place that were very closely correlated with higher levels of place attachment. They were first social offerings. So when people felt like their place had things to do and people to do them with, they were more likely to be attached. Second was aesthetics. People wanted to feel like their place was beautiful in some way. And when they felt that, they were more likely to be attached as well. And last is openness. So when people felt like their town was welcoming, that it welcomed all kinds of people and provided opportunities for everyone. Attachment rose. And then there was this other interesting part of this, that when attachment rose in cities, so did local GDP. That place attachment and economic growth tended to happen in tandem. So when I first heard about that, I'm like, this is sort of a chicken and an egg situation. Maybe it's just that people like to live in places that are economically vibrant, or where things are happening, growth is happening. But the research actually said it was the other way around. Our theory is that when a community's residents are highly attached, they will spend more time there, spend more money. They're more productive and tend to be more entrepreneurial. So place-attached people behave differently. They start businesses, they buy real estate, they support local businesses, they eat at local restaurants, they donate to local causes. They do things that are good for themselves and good for their community. So it is truly a win-win. That place attachment is kind of great for everyone involved. I also think that place attachment speaks to something deep inside us. That Brene Brown has said that comes from the inside of us as a very human need to belong. Evolutionarily, we come from communities, and yet our modern society has moved away from that. And more of us are feeling independent in a not great way. When we live in a place that we love and we become part of the community, it speaks to something deep inside us, that need to belong, that need to be part of a community. And so I think place attachment can be healing in that way. So before we go any further, I want to see how place attached you guys are. So I'm going to give you a quick place attachment pop quiz. I'm going to show you 10 statements, one at a time. And I want you to just keep track of how many times you say yes for where you live right now. So you probably have 10 fingers, you can just keep track on your fingers, or you can do hash marks on a piece of paper. I'm just going to see how attached you are to where you live. So 1, I feel comfortable here. 2, I know my way around. 3, the friendships I have with people in my community mean a lot to me. 4, I like to tell people about where I live. 6, I can rely on people in this town to help me. 7, my town isn't perfect, but there are a lot of things that make me love it. 8, something exciting or happening here, I'd want to be involved. 9, care about the future success of my town. And 10, it feels like home. Okay. Take a second, add up your score, and let's see how you did. So raise your hand if you scored a 7 or above. Okay, maybe almost everyone in the room, a lot of people. And that is not a perfect place attachment score, but a solid place attachment score. You don't have to do 100% on all these measures to be like, yes, I'm attached to my town. And that means you may be reaping all these benefits of place attachment without even knowing it. What about, did we have any perfect 10s in the room? Hey, awesome. You guys can just go. So I'm really happy to have you here, and happy to have your expertise in the room, that this is something you live on a daily basis. Now, what about the other end of the spectrum? Do we have any 3s or below? No one is willing to admit that in public. I see a hand. It's a hard thing, right? And I like to remind people that even if you scored a 7 or an 8 or a 9 or a 10, you know people in your town who wouldn't, right? You know people that if they took this quiz, they'd be getting the 1 or the 2, and they live in the exact same place that you do. What is that about? I recently met a woman who was part of what happened a lot during the pandemic. That during the pandemic, as everything turned upside down, nearly half of Americans reassessed where they live. And this woman, Kristen, was one of them. She and her husband had been living in Minneapolis for many years, but all of a sudden their kids were off to college and their jobs went totally remote, the way they did for a lot of people. They became what I call anywhereists in my second book, If You Could Live Anywhere. And because of that, they started asking themselves that question: where should we go? We can go anywhere. Where should we go? And so they got onto my favorite website, realtor.com, and they fell in love with a house in a town in Southwest Virginia that will not be named. Because it was COVID times, they felt like they couldn't actually go there, check it out. And so they did something that I do not recommend. They just bought that house. Don't do that, guys. They bought the house. A few months later, they moved in, and there is good news and bad news for Kristen. The good news is that they like the house. That's good. The house is working out for them. The bad news is they do not like the town in Southwest Virginia that will not be named. It just doesn't feel like home to them. And Kristen actually told me, if we had come before we bought the house, I'm not sure we would have gone through with it. Not sure we would have actually moved here. But what's done is done. They are there and they are feeling stuck. So this is what I told Kristen, and what I would tell anyone who's in that situation who maybe scored a 3 on their place attachment pop quiz. That place attachment is malleable. It changes. It changes over time. It changes in response to what's happening in our lives, what's happening in the life of our town. I find that my place attachment tends to go up a little in summer and down a little in winter. And it changes over the time we spend in the community. Back in my early days in Blacksburg, as I was starting to read about place attachment, I saw this, that place attachment can take about 5 years to peak after you move to a new city. And I was like, dang, I don't want to be miserable for the next 5 years. I don't want to wait that long. I knew about place attachment. I knew I wanted to drink that Kool-Aid, but I wanted to accelerate the process. And so I developed a very non-scientific hypothesis, which is that if I started behaving like a place-attached person behaves, that maybe I could create the emotions of place attachment inside of myself, and that I could do it a little faster than it would happen normally. So here's how I approached it. I identified 10 sort of broad behaviors that are correlated with place attachment in the scientific literature. And for each of these, I developed what I called a love where you live experiment, which was like a little mini action step, a little behavior change that I could do that was designed to make me fall in love with my town. So, there's research that spending time in nature makes people feel more connected with the place where they live. And so I started hiking more on the trails around Blacksburg. There's lots of research that people who eat local food are more civically engaged, and that's part of place attachment. So I started shopping at the farmers market more. Volunteering is just good across the board in every way and good for communities. So I became a volunteer at the local nonprofit historic movie theater. And I wrote all about these experiences in my first book, This Is Where You Belong. But I will just go ahead and give you the spoiler right now, which is that they worked. Not everything worked. I definitely did some things that were just lame and didn't help. And they don't work at once, but cumulatively over time, these love where you live experiments were effective. because place to touch people behave differently. And when I started behaving differently too, I started developing place attachment. I remember the day that I sort of realized that it worked. I was riding my bike. I was with my daughter and we were riding our bikes. There's a Rails to Trails project called the Huckleberry Trail that goes through Blacksburg. And we were riding our bikes on the Huckleberry Trail. We headed to my favorite places, the library and the farmer's market. The sun was shining and I just felt this kind of like well-being, this sense of happiness. I thought, man, I love it here and I don't want to move, which was crazy because I always wanted to move. I believed in the geographic care and I was always looking for the next town that would be better, the place that would heal me. And all of a sudden I didn't feel that desire anymore. I don't think it was an accident that that realization happened while I was on a bike. So honestly, before I even thought of the idea of Love Where You Live experiments, I was walking and biking in my town because that is my only form of exercise. I do not run unless chase. And so I was walking and biking, and without even knowing it, I was doing something that happens to be incredibly good for building place attachment. And I think that helped me in this journey to become attached to Blacksburg. So I want to tell you, for the rest of the time we have, about 3 ways that I think biking and walking and active transportation and building the infrastructure for it with complete streets helps people in our communities develop place attachment, even if they don't know that it's happening. So first, biking and walking help build relationships. If I could leave you with one thought about place attachment, it's that it almost always comes back to relationships. That we need to feel connected to other humans in our community for us to feel rooted there. I was at a conference like this several years ago, and after I spoke, a woman came up to me and she said, you know, I really liked a lot of things about my place, but I haven't made any friends here. And so I'm probably going to move. And that is what happens when people don't feel like they have strong relationships with friends in their community. They won't want to stay. Unfortunately, that is becoming harder and harder. According to a Cigna study, 61% of Americans always or sometimes feel lonely. And less than 50% of us know our neighbors by name. The way we live in communities has changed, and it's taking a toll on our ability to attach to our communities and attach to each other. And so when I wanted to change that, when I wanted to develop a Love Where You Live experiment that would help me get to know my neighbors, I did something super basic, and I baked some banana bread. And on National Good Neighbor Day, on September 28th, it is a real national holiday, sort of like Talk Like a Pirate Day. I took banana muffins to my neighbors, and that led to conversations, which led to sharing some dinners together, which led to us feeling comfortable asking each other to take care of our kids in an emergency. So doing those things helped me get to know my neighbors. But there was something that I did even before I took the banana bread around, and that was participate in something in Blacksburg called the Mayor's Bike Ride. Not long after we moved there, I read about it in the newspaper, and I decided our family would go. We took our bikes and we went down to the local elementary school, and it turned out to be basically what they said it would be. It was a bike ride with the mayor. He led us about, on a mile path through some neighborhoods, and we ended up at the library, and there were cookies and lemonade, and it was fun. But what stayed with me was how social it was. At that point, we didn't really know anyone. But we saw that everyone else knew people. Like adults were talking and kids were running across the grass at the school. And I think that happened because people were out of their cars. They were given something to do together. And that fostered conversation, which fostered relationships. There are lots of other examples of how this happens. In Fargo, North Dakota, I participated in an open streets event, which came to Fargo just because someone had gone on vacation somewhere that had this and they thought it was cool, and they brought it to Fargo. And now it is a beloved community event where 3 times a summer, they close a network of downtown streets to cars and traffic, open it up to people on bikes and on foot and on roller skates. And they bring in other sort of community building demonstrations, like the marching band plays, and there are demonstrations of karate. And people talk to each other, or they're at least seeing each other. It gives people the chance to be in proximity to each other in a way that I think makes us feel like we're in relationship with our community, and that builds place attachment. So when Bogota, Colombia started its ciclovia back in the 70s, they originally did it to fight traffic and pollution. But one of the big benefits of it is that it creates a space every single week where people come together, all kinds of people, and it becomes a very inclusive event. I'm going to show you a video of that. Oh, that's enough. Try that.
We're at Ciclovia in downtown Bogota. It's 117 kilometers of closed off bike path that goes from the north to the south, to the east, to the west of the whole city. And literally 1.5 million people come out to it every Sunday. This is Oscar Luis. He is in charge of coordinating all of the activities around Ciclovia.
O sea, si habláramos de íconos de ciudad como el Central Park de Nueva York o como la Torre Eiffel en París, uno de los íconos de Bogotá es la ciclovía.
Ciclovia, which is now 43 years old, is about promoting healthy lifestyle. There are also some very real environmental concerns, as Bogota is one of the most polluted major cities in Latin America.
Sino como un medio muy importante para la movilidad de toda nuestra ciudad y sobre todo para la conservación del medio ambiente, que hoy es uno de los factores más importantes en el mundo. El uso de la bicicleta como una estrategia para conservar nuestro planeta.
Un poquito de aire sin contaminación, ya que acá se respeta mucho lo de la ciclovía y no salen muchos carros de los chicos para poder nosotros entrar y respirar aire fresco.
There are all sorts of attractions and services along the route, like bike repairs, free health screenings, and musical performances.
Es el lugar en donde todos nos podemos encontrar, en donde todos somos iguales, los ricos con los pobres, los niños con los adultos, los jóvenes con los viejos, en donde todo el mundo es igual, todo el mundo tiene la misma oportunidad de disfrutar su ciudad. Por eso es tan importante la ciclovía, porque es el lugar de inclusión por excelencia.
Digamos que me parece la mejor experiencia que puede tener Bogotá. Reitero también, digamos que tú sales de tu casa y puedes encontrar muchas sorpresas en la ciclorruta.
Pues me gusta la ciclovía porque es otra forma de pasar un fin de semana. Ves mucha variedad de personas, de animales, es divertido y pues obviamente porque hace deporte.
Maybe Ciclovia is even a little too successful at getting Colombians out into a public space.
¿No? Con el tiempo está cambiando, como se podrá dar cuenta ahora más, porque hay mucha convención de pedazos.
So that's what placemaking looks like, because as Jim Walker, Big Car Collaborator says, placemaking is defined by what happens, what people do in a place. When we create opportunities for them to be together actively in the streets, that's placemaking. It's sort of amazing how many people like being in streets. We saw that before the pandemic with cartlets, and during the pandemic with streeteries. And maybe it's because streets are sort of forbidden. You don't normally hang out in the street. If you give people opportunities to be in a street, they sort of love it. It's important for place attachment, because social offerings matter to place attachment. People want to feel like they can be with others, and that there are things to do together. This graphic from Hayden Carter ended on shows just how much more people socialize on streets that have less car traffic.
So we can do things to our towns that encourage people to build relationships in ways that foster place attachment. And that helps people love their community, put down roots, and want to stay. So the second thing that I think biking and walking does is help community members discover the assets of their town. One thing that I learned as I was learning about place attachment was that every town is good at everything. No town is good at everything, but every town is good at something. And if you want to love your town, you have to do what your town is good at. For me, when I was developing the Love Where You Live experiment around this, I realized that what my town was good at was college football. And actually, I would take that back. They are not very good at it. At least not right now. But in a town that is dominated by Virginia Tech, Hokie football is a big deal. It is a really big deal during the fall when football games are played. And my confession is that I am a person who really does not care about sports ball, and I don't understand it. But I knew that this was a big deal in my community, and that if I wanted to feel rooted in my community, I had to embrace it to some level. So I got the t-shirt, I went to the football game, didn't understand what was going on, but learned that I really love it when they play Enter Sandman, and everyone jumps up and down while the team comes on to the field. So we create place attachment when we embrace the assets that our community has to offer. Some are really obvious, like college football games, hard to miss. But a lot of assets in our community, we kind of have to hunt for. And that process of discovery happens a lot easier when we are moving at the human pace that biking and walking gives us. We hear about this thing called the windshield perspective, which says that when people are in cars, they just don't really see what's going on around them. This graphic from Margaret Stamm of Freiburg University shows what kids remember seeing when they're driven to school versus what they see when they walk to school. It's rich in detail when they walk. It's sort of a blank when they drive. And I think that happens to adults too. We just don't notice our community when we're always inside a car. So I've driven by West End Cemetery in Blacksburg a million times before one day I happened to be passing it on foot and went inside this 1800 cemetery and saw how cool it was. We tend to discover things on foot because we just have more of a spirit of adventure and it feels more accessible. So I've encountered a lot of things in Blacksburg on foot or on bike that I never would have if I was in a car. Pathways, parks, neighborhoods, houses, things that I never would have seen. I love this tweet that I saw describing what this feels like. About 3 weeks after I first started riding full time, on my way somewhere, I'd only ever gone by car via freeway, saw a googly-eyed Shih Tzu with its tongue flapping out, chasing butterflies through a garden. It changed my perspective forever. I never want to miss that stuff. And then these follow-up weeks, I get to smile and wave at so many babies in strollers now. Right? It's the best. Goofy dogs, smiling babies, amazing yard sculptures, the best. We see a lot when we're on foot that we wouldn't see if we weren't on foot. And the other part is that streets that encourage walking and biking tend to be more beautiful, which is important because aesthetics matter to place attachment, and they create more assets to discover. This is a picture of Groningen in the Netherlands that Brent Tavarian posted on Twitter before it was just basically a parking lot. But eventually they made it a place for people, an asset for people to discover. And that happened in Herald Square in New York too, that a place that once was just full of traffic became a place for people to gather. It created assets for people to discover. So I think biking and walking helps us discover these assets in our town in a way that helps us build place attachment, love the place that we live. The last thing I want to tell you about is how biking and walking help us create good things in our community.
So when you have picky kids, there is this piece of advice that you will hear over and over again, which is just have your kids help you prepare the meal. Because if they have a role in preparing the meal, they'll feel more of a sense of ownership and they are far more likely to eat the thing that they themselves made. And as the mother of two picky kids, I don't know that that works with picky kids, but I do think it works with people in places. Ethan Kent from Project for Public Spaces says the cities that succeed are the ones that allow people to help create them. That's how they become better places, but also how people are going to become more attached to them. When we feel like we can help create our place, we feel more attached. So when I was developing a Love Where You Live experiment for this, I worked on what I thought was going to be a sidewalk chalk festival. It turned into a sidewalk chalk activity. It was pretty low key, but it helped me feel like I've made something good happen in my town. And I shared lots of examples of what I see happening in other communities. I talk about clean and green projects and people who make murals, and this guy in Germany who puts eyeballs on inanimate objects. And there's no reason to do some of these things other than to create a little bit of delight, right? A little bit of joy in communities. Peter Pagian calls them love letters to your city. And I think one of the best ways, probably the most common ways that people write those love letters to their city is by making changes in our streets and in our trails. So I'm going to show you a short video about that. Let me see if I actually make that work.
Ron Thompson was frustrated.
We have this traffic that flows through here with folks being.
The year was 2018. He requested that the city government of DC install a crosswalk at a dangerous, confusing intersection.
We have a school zone everywhere visible. You can't see the flashing lights.
Then in 2019, just blocks away, a pedestrian was killed. So Ron decided to act. He teamed up with another activist, Michael Kircher, and they painted a crosswalk themselves. It was illegal, but they felt the risk was worth it. What Ron and Michael did is one example of a broader movement called tactical urbanism.
At the heart of the tactical urbanist is a commitment to community. Citizens making their cities better, one action at a time. That is basically how cities got built from the very beginning.
Across the country, people frustrated with the pace of change in urban infrastructure are taking matters into their own hands. And a surprising thing is happening. Instead of fighting back, cities are embracing the approach, partnering with tactical urbanists to bootstrap improvements in infrastructure.
These projects are aimed at making a better street, a better block, a better city.
This is Mike Wyden. He and his partner Tony Garcia run Street Plans, an urban planning firm that uses tactical urbanism techniques to change city infrastructure quickly.
Within cities, there's a lot of inertia and a lot of competing demands. Kind of the common thread is, well, if the city government's not doing it, and if my neighbors aren't doing it, and local businesses aren't doing it, I'm gonna do it.
I like that. No one else is doing it, so I'm going to do it. That's what happens that's what happens in our streets, and I think maybe because we use them, so we see when they're not safe, and we want to make change.
Ron Thompson.
The smart cities are the ones that are open to that kind of feedback, who partner with their residents to improve streets. And you can do it in all sorts of ways, right? You can paint a crosswalk to make it more visible and more beautiful. You can develop a pop-up bike lane. You can even yarn bomb a bike rack. But when we do these things, we tend to feel a sense of ownership of our place. I remember talking to the guy who owned the bike shop in Fargo, North Dakota, and he said, when I ride my bike through a place, I own it. It becomes part of me. And I think that is what we want to happen for all our residents. We want people to feel like they own their city and that it's part of them. So at the end of the day, place attachment is a choice. Not all places are the same. Not all places are as livable or as lovable as others. But we can always choose how we behave in our place. And we can choose actions that help us develop that sense of love for our community and help us put down roots. The thing, however, is that not everyone in your town knows about Love Where You Live experiments. They may not be motivated to try them. So it works for community leaders to create places where people are doing these kind of things, including walking and biking, kind of by accident. We build the infrastructure that allows people to have love where you live experiences, whether they like it or not. And they will be surprised to find that they feel a little happier in their community. When you make happy those who are near, those who are far more likely to come. That talent, attraction, and retention. So I'm not kidding myself that the reason you guys are here, the reason you may be working to promote biking and walking and active transportation and the infrastructure that supports them in your communities is because you really believe in place attachment. Guessing you may not have even known about it before today. But I hope it gives you an extra why. We want to make our places safe. We want to make them welcoming, but we also want to make places that are lovable for the people who live there. Because when places are lovable, the people who are in them thrive, and so do the places. So thank you so much for letting me be here today.
Good morning.
Good morning. Melody, I have to say, I'm also part of the Melody Farm Fan Club, and I've been for a long time. And I just want to thank you for those words that probably felt both inspired, reassuring for all of us who are working in isolation, trying to do these things to make our communities better and to nurture that place of attachment. And I have to say, for you to come to a place like Greenville, which seems to have some of the most profound place attachment I've ever experienced, I think is particularly special. So thank you for being here. This was amazing. And I'm sure Melody might be willing to hang out for questions maybe a little bit. Okay, so if you have questions, I know I certainly do. I'm sure other people do. Want to make sure to let you know Melody will be available. We are going to take a 10-minute stretch break. Bio break in order for our next panel to get set up. We're really excited about our next panel where the trail meets the road. It's so exciting to talk about how cycling passing ways can facilitate commuter connectivity, and we've got 3 really great presenters. So take 10 minutes, look at your watch or your clock, your phone. 10 minutes, whatever it says, is when you're back here. Thank you so much.